Hey guys, it's Jake here with Etrailer. Today we have a 2022 Newmar Dutch Star, and we're going to be taking a look at, and I'm going to show you how to install the SeeLeveL tank monitoring system. This system is going to help you to more accurately monitor your fresh, gray, black, and your battery. It's going to have a button for each one of them so that whenever you think your tanks are getting close, you simply push a button and it'll show you that you're at 4% of your tank being full. Our freshwater we know has a little bit more in it. It just gives you a more accurate reading than your system would otherwise. The issue we were having with this coach is that not necessarily that the system to measure how much water is in each one of the tanks didn't work, is that they kept having faults. So in your traditional style tank, you're going to have probes that stick into the side of the tank, and that's where you get your 1/3 readings, which is your empty, 1/3, 2/3, and then full. Those systems, there's all kinds of issues with them because you can get toilet paper and stuff stuck on the inside of the bolt, and that's going to give you a false reading. That's what this system is designed to help with. The particular issue that we're having on this coach is that the tanks are based off of weight. So there's a weight sensors on the insides of the tanks that will tell you, basically they measure out the weight of the water, and that's how they know how full they are. Well, he keeps having faults on the sensors in there, so he wants this system, the SeeLeveL system, as a backup so he knows exactly how much is in his tanks at all times. Now you can see the outsides of our tanks here. This is what the system is going to look like. Included, you'll get the touch panel, which we just talked about over there, and then you're going to get however many sensors you need. So you need to find the correct kit for you. We'll have a sensor on our freshwater tank, which was saying it was about 25% full, which is pretty darn close. It's covering 25% of our sensor, but with these particular sensors, you will have to cut them down in size, so you may lose a little bit at the bottom and a little bit at the top. But then you can see we've got one on our gray water tank and our black water, so we can accurately measure all of those tank levels. What you'll notice, the biggest thing about the biggest difference between these sensors and the other two types of measuring that we just talked about, the system that's on this coach with the weight scale, and then the system that's on pretty much all other coaches, is those bolts. The bolts are going to be on the inside of the tank, and so is that weight scale. All three of these sensors are mounted on the outside, and you don't ever have to worry about anything getting caught up on them or having to clean them. Now, there's not a whole lot more to talk about the SeeLeveL system itself before we get into the installation. The one thing that I will say that most people like the most about this system is that it's not going to be in 1/3 increments anymore, because if you're at the top of the 1/3 mark and really getting close to the 2/3, it's still going to show 1/3 full. Even if you're getting an accurate rating, it's still only telling you at 33%, 66%, and then 100%. With these, you're going to break it down to a much more accurate measurement. And you can look at these sensors, and essentially you'll take the number of sensors and divide that into 100. So we have 6 sensors here on the side. This strip originally had 8, but in order to fit the tank properly, we had to cut 2 off. So you can take that and divide it out, and essentially what that's going to do is it's going to break it down into increments of about 12 to 14%. So they'll be able to see a lot more along the way than they would if they just had their original, 1/3, 2/3, and 3/3 full. Before we jump into the installation, I do want to make one note. If you have a sensor like this, you cannot have a piece of steel like this bar here. We had to move this over. You cannot have it within 1 inch of the front of the sensor because it will set off the sensor and you'll get an inaccurate reading. It'll show that it's always got something in the tank. So what we did with this, for example, this bar, we just unscrewed it, slid it over, got it far enough away. This aluminum support here shouldn't cause us issues, but even if it does, it's still about 2.5 inches away from our tank, so we shouldn't have to worry about that. The reason I point that out is because if you're trying to get these sensors into a really tight spot, if you're trying to mount them in between the two tanks, you want to make sure that you're 1 inch away from any steel component and that the sensors themselves are not pointing at each other. So you have to stagger them a little bit. That's why on this coach, it really could not have worked out any better because the sides of our tanks are all right here. The panel that goes up against this is going to be wood, so we don't have to worry about anything interfering with the signal. But with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the install. To begin our installation, you're going to need to find access to your tanks. On our Newmar, You'll have your wet bay on the opposite side of our panel we're working in now. This is going to be directly in front of the rear axle. So just open up that bay door. You may have a peg panel here or some sort of covering to cover all these wires and stuff. So we removed all that stuff, and you can see the sides of our two tanks. We've got our black water and our gray water, and then we've got our fresh water down here. Those are the three tanks that we're going to be putting our sensors on. What you want to do is, because we have such clear access to this, we had this little support beam down here, and you have to move that because it's steel, and you have to be at least an inch away from steel, or else you'll get this, the sensor will malfunction. So we'll start with our fresh water here, and you'll see here we've got the 12-inch sensors. You can cut these down, and you'll just want to look at it, and you can see here that we're kind of cutting into the second sensor, and we need this to be at the top just like this. So I'm going to take a pair of scissors and cut two of these sensors off the bottom. Now if your tanks end up being taller or shorter, you want to get the sensor that is as close to the size of your tank. We've got our tanks are about 9.5 inches tall, so you want to get the closest size. If you have to go over the size of your tank, that's better than having a sensor that is too small. If we had a 6-inch sensor, we'd only be about this high up on the tank, and obviously that's not going to help us. So we'll get the next size up and then cut it down. So you just want to make sure that you go between the two sensors. Be sure not to nick it. As soon as you cut that, you can see now that this is going to be the last sensor on our board here. Since this is our freshwater strip that we just made up, we're not going to trim any of these tabs on top. You can see that there's the little circuit board running through each tab, and when we get to our gray and our black tanks, to assign them to the sensor, we're going to trim the gray tab for our gray tank and trim the black tab for our black tank. But for the freshwater, don't touch any of the tabs. And we'll take a rag with a little bit of rubbing alcohol on it, and we're going to clean off the spot on the tank where we're going to stick our sensor. We'll peel back the adhesive on the back side. Careful not to get your wires in there. This stuff is really, really sticky, so wherever you decide to put it, that's where it's going to stay. We're going to come down a little bit from the top, just so that we don't get this angle of that curvature in our reading. We'll just stick it to the tank. And you want to press on it all the way up. Be sure that it's going to have a good hold. We'll repeat that same process for our other two tanks. You want to make sure that you know which one is gray and which one's black. Trim those tabs off the top for the appropriate tank. And for our specific scenario, we do have a little bit of a lip here. I'm going to try to take either my knife or a little die grinder and just slowly edge that down so that we have a flat surface to put our sensor on. So we're getting ready to put our gray tank sensor on because we've got everything prepped for it. You can see these little, we looked at a little bit earlier, but you can see these circuit boards, they'll run around where it says 2 gray. What you want to do is you want to cut that circuit so that essentially you're telling the sensor to run this sensor as the gray tank. So that's all you have to do is just cut that off. Because we just broke that circuit in there, now the sensor knows that it belongs to the gray tank. So let's say you do your black tank sensor first and then you accidentally cut your tab for your black sensor again, just because you're kind of in the role of doing this install. If you cut two of the same tab, just cut the other tab too. So if you cut the gray and black, you can still use that for your fresh tank. If you do your fresh tank like we did already, and you do your black tank and you cut this, you will have to get a new sensor. So just so you know, you can start with your gray or black. If you make a mistake, you can cut that other tab, whichever one you cut double of. Just cut the other one and you can assign that to your freshwater, and then just make sure you don't make that mistake for your last sensor. With all of our sensors mounted up, what we're going to do is we need to wire up each one of these. So they'll have a black wire and a blue wire. The black wires will all get tied to a ground source, which you can use the chassis. We happen to have a ground block over here, so we're going to use that. So we'll tie a wire into this black wire on the bottom, run up to our other sensor, tie that one in, tie our other sensor in, and then run our final wire to this block. The blue wires, you'll want to do the same thing, tie all those together, but those are going to have to go over to the other side where we're going to mount our panel next to all of the other wet bay stuff. You're going to have 4 wires on the plug that goes on the back of the panel. The blue wire is going to get connected to all of these blue wires, so we'll connect that wire that we run across to this. The black wire is going to be your ground. The red wire is going to be your 12-volt source, and then your white wire, we're not using that today, but that is for this little green indicator light for the pump. Because we're just using this as a secondary system, we're not actually going to hook the pump up because his pump switch is on the inside of his motorhome. So we're just going to leave that alone. We'll wrap this wire up and tie it away. But those other wires will have to get connected. I'm going to go ahead and make all those connections, and we'll come back and show you how we routed them. We've got all of our wires ran. You can see we've got our black wire. We just had some scrap white wire hanging around here at the shop, so I use that for our ground. Run up, tie into our other black wire, continue on, tie into our other black wire, and then we just grounded it to this ground block. And then for our blue wire, I did have some scrap blue wire. You will want to get some length of wire. If I had to pick 2 colors to get, you can get black and white or white and blue, whichever. It really doesn't matter, just as long as you keep it all straight in your head. The more important part about the wires, or the most important part I should say, is you can see these loose zip ties I have here. This is just to keep the wires away from the sensors on the side. You see this little word here, it says wires this direction. It doesn't matter if it hangs over top of this side on the right, but it does if you have it hanging over the sensors on the left. If you have the wires draped over those sensors, it will give you a false reading. So just make sure that, you know, however you tie it off, we tied it off to where even bouncing down the road, these wires are not going to ever drape across the other wire or the other sensors. That goes true to say for other wires too. Make sure you get all your other wires. These wires were originally hanging down in front of these. I didn't want them to cause any issues, so I just tucked them all up high and tight and tied them up with zip ties. Once we got all our blue wires connected, the last wire that you connect to all of them, you'll want to run across to the other side of our motorhome. On the other side of our vehicle, you want to take that wire that you ran over from the passenger side. We connected it to our blue wire because that is our sensors. The white wire we're not going to be using because we're not going to need to use the pump switch. And then the red wire and the black wire, you just want to run to a power and ground. So you can see here we put a few jumpers on there, ran them over, and then we tapped into, we are very, very fortunate to have a 12-volt source right here. So we tapped our red wire into this red wire. We tested it up inside of this connector, and that is a good 12-volt source. And then our white wire, we just grounded to wherever this frame bracket is for our door. Once we make all of our connections and get our remote connected up, we know everything's working properly, then I'm just going to take these wires and set them behind this wall and tie them off to some hoses we have back there, just so that they stay safe and out of the way. And you can see I've got a piece of blue tape on here. Your standard 2-inch blue painter's tape works perfect for this because it's the exact same size, the same width as the hole that we need to cut out. So I just cut a piece the same length as this is here, stuck it to our wall, and now we can get it cut out. We're using a multi-tool in order to cut this out. This is just a plastic panel, so you can probably try to use a razor blade or something of that nature in order to get this cut out. Once you get it cut out, if you have any of these plastic edges here that it's just a melted plastic, take it and just peel it off. You can also use a razor blade in order to shave it down. Once you get your hole cut out, we'll want to take our plug, get it connected to our panel, and just gently feed the wires back in there. And when you're mounting this up, you want to make sure that it's square with either the side or some other lettering. So I'm just going to square it up to this so it looks nice and clean. With all of our connections made, we can test out our system. So you want to push and hold the button. It will stay illuminated for a few seconds so we can see our batteries working fine. Our fresh tank is about 25%. Our gray tank has nothing in it. and our black tank just has a little bit in it. Once you know everything's working properly, you can get everything buttoned back up. You want to go over to the other side, put your paneling back on, and that's going to do it for our look at and installation of the SeeLeveL tank monitoring system on our 2022 Newmar Dutch Star.